It's time to take a look at the Week 7 waiver wire. We're taking a look at 25 players to add or drop from your fantasy roster here. And we're going to start out here with the most popular waiver wire ads that are out there. And remember, we're recording this before the Monday night game, so that might change a little bit as you get into Tuesday here. But we're going to tell you whether you should be adding or leaving these players alone. And all these guys that we're taking a look at here are available in at least 60% of ESPN leagues or more. Dave, why don't you kick us off with the running backs?
So Latavius Murray is still available in 71% of leagues. And Alfredo, we talked about this last week that, we kind of had these expectations that James Cook could take that big step forward this year and possibly be a top 5, top 10 running back. I don't know if we're going to see that come to fruition. I mean, it seems like they're starting to reel back his workload a little bit. He's great at what he does, but at the end of the day, the high value touches just aren't there. He's not seeing as many targets as we hoped, and the red zone work is going almost exclusively to Latavius Murray. He has 12 looks inside the red zone this year, which is twice as many as Damian Harris and 4 more than James Cook. So now, obviously, we saw it yesterday. Damian Harris went down with an injury, presumed to miss some time, and a lot of that goal line work was going to the two of them. But now Latavius Murray, is going to see his role grow even a little bit more. And this is a guy that we just seem to count out year after year after year, and he keeps producing. I mean, last year, he was a pretty significant part of the Broncos offense. The year before, he was with Baltimore, being a pretty big part of that offense. And before that, he was in New Orleans. I mean, this guy bounces around to a new team every year and is good enough to carve out a role. He's not going to be an RB1. He's not going to be getting a ton of usage, but I think there's going to be enough there, especially in the red zone and near the goal line, that he can pay off as a streamable RB2 or RB3.
Yeah, Latavius Murray. I'm not that surprised when I heard it, but oldest active running back in the NFL right now, still producing. I'm going to give it away here, but I'm the same age as Latavius Murray. I can barely get out of bed in the morning. So for him to be out there still playing in the NFL, good for him, man. Good for him. The next guy on this list is Tyjae Spears, and we've talked about him. I want to say every single week for the last 4 weeks, we've talked about Tyjae Spears as a guy that you need to go out there and get. So I'll keep this really simple. He's still available in 61% of leagues. This past week, I know Derrick Henry had himself a nice game, but Tyjae Spears, more snaps than Derrick Henry in this game. Even though the production and the final numbers might have swung in one direction, we just continue to see that Spears is getting more and more work. This Titans team, not very good. They still need weapons around him. And right now, Tyjae Spears is the running back 30 in fantasy football. He remains a high-end handcuff. Dave, take us to our next guy.
Real quick, with Tyjae Spears, could there be two more different types of runners? I mean, it is so fun. We hear about that thunder and lightning all the time, and Derrick Henry is the thunder. I mean, just straight line speed, looks like a defensive end out there running with the football, and then you've got Tyjae Spears just like a little jitterbug carving up the open field. It is really fun to see that duo in action together in Tennessee. But I'm going to talk about a guy we talked about last week, and I'm going to mention him again here, D'Onta Foreman. He had 15 carries and a target last week, which is a lot more than I think any of us had expected. Just dominated the backfield and didn't look great, but looked serviceable enough. Now, we don't know if Roschon Johnson is going to be back in time for week 7. Still hasn't been able to practice, but I think that at this point, you should pick up D'Onta Foreman just to see what happens. Now, Justin Fields is also presumed to miss some time. They're saying a dislocated thumb. There's already murmurs that he might be hitting IR. Again, we're recording Monday morning, so we don't have the details yet. But if he does have to miss any time, Tyson Bagent seems very much more likely to check down to the running back. So we could see some of those high-value touches going back to the backfield near the goal line and in the passing game. So, I like Roschon Johnson if he's available. Pick him up too and stash him in case he could make it back for week 7. But Raiders and Chargers over the next 2 weeks are pretty decent spot starts for running backs.
Yeah, and D'Onta Foreman, we saw he was able to produce pretty well, and I wonder what's going to happen when Roschon Johnson returns, Dave, like you mentioned. But as of right now, I mean, just you got to take what's being given to you out there in the waiver wire. There's not a whole lot still out there in fantasy football at the running back position. And I'll take us to our next guy here, and it's Kareem Hunt, running back for the Cleveland Browns. He's still available in 73% of leagues, and I think that we were all expecting Kareem Hunt to continue to have a role, but we weren't sure what kind of role that was going to be. And this past week, we saw it kind of blow up a little bit where he got 15 touches, 70 plus yards and a touchdown. Now, Jerome Ford still looked good later on in the game, but up until that fourth quarter, Kareem Hunt led the team in rushing through the first 3 quarters. He was second on the team in receiving yards. He has carved out a role, especially while Deshaun Watson's not available to play under center. So we've seen this Cleveland Browns offense has not been something that's been very dependable. not really an offense that you can plug and play a lot of their starters, maybe outside of Amari Cooper. And even then, it's kind of wishy-washy. But at the running back position, things have gotten so out of hand where there's not enough healthy guys available to you each week that Kareem Hunt becomes a guy that if you need a solid RB3 or a guy that you can flex out, especially in those PPR leagues, Kareem Hunt becomes a pretty viable option, especially with a guy that he's even getting goal line work, Dave, which I don't think that we've really seen that a whole lot in his career, being, tending to be one of the smaller guys and being more of the receiving back. But we've seen Jerome Ford is getting a bit more of the receiving work while Kareem Hunt is getting the goal line work. So there's
really
a bit of a
bizarre
mixture
usage.
there.
I'm really struggling to get a read on that Cleveland backfield because you and I talked about it briefly yesterday. I tweeted about it. Jerome Ford looks like the best running back, but they didn't give him any work until the fourth quarter. And it's like when the game was on the line, then they trusted Jerome Ford. But yeah, you can't ignore the usage with Kareem Hunt. I feel like this is kind of similar to 2 years ago, not making the comp that Jerome Ford is Nick Chubb, but where there are two fantasy viable running backs out of Cleveland. I think that you can rely on Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt in fantasy.
Yeah, and before we get to our next guy, I want to make sure if you're watching this video, you're enjoying the conversation we're having so far, please click that like button, give us a thumbs up, make sure you like this video, and then drop your waiver wire questions in the comments below. I do my best to get back to every single one of these questions as the week continues to go on, and make sure you're subscribed to the Football Guys channel. That way you're able to get all of the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show episodes. We're bringing you episodes Monday through Thursday. We've also got the Audible classic show, award-winning show, it's been around for years and years, and we've got the Football Guys Dynasty show as well. And of course, our Sunday morning live start sit. Dave, why don't you take us to our next running back here?
Now, we were talking about Amari DeMercado last week. A lot of people were expecting a big role for him.
Yep.
And, I've always kind of liked Keaontay Ingram, and I think a lot of people struggle to look past the yards per carry, which have, been objectively pretty terrible for the last couple of years. But Keaontay Ingram just fits that mold to be a 3-down back, 6 foot, 225 pounds, big guy out of USC who can handle a pretty significant workload. And Damian Williams and Amari DeMercado, they're both going to be in the mix, but I think Ingram has the most value while Connor's out. He led the backfield in carries, led the backfield in targets. That being said, I think that DeMercado, I don't think we're ready to completely throw in the towel on him yet. I mean, he led the team in snaps and he ran more routes than any of the other running backs there. He just wasn't getting the touches. And I think the problem here is that Josh Dobbs, as we've seen, likes to scramble the ball rather than checking down. He's just going to take off and run with it. So, this is another one where it's a tough backfield to get a read on, but right now with Keaontay Ingram leading the backfield in carries and targets, he's the guy that I think should be most valuable on the waiver wire and might even be a streamable guy as early as next week.
I'll say this, when it comes to that Cardinals backfield, I want no part of it. I want no part of it. And because, like you said, DeMercado led the team in snaps at the running back position. And then we have Damian Williams out there who, what the heck? Like we go out, let's spend our FAAB on Amari DeMercado. Let's go out and, okay, no, you know what? Let's spend our FAAB on Keaontay Ingram because he's the guy that's the starter on the depth chart.
Nobody counted on Damian Williams.
He wasn't on the active roster during the week. They signed him from the practice squad at the end of the week, and then all of a sudden he's out there getting the touches early on Sunday. It was just a bizarre situation. I don't want any part of it. But
looking ahead at next week against Seattle, I mean, Seattle hasn't been good against the run, so Ingram, I mean, I'm not saying that you need to plug Ingram into your lineup, but there's a lot of people hurting right now with injuries and bye weeks that I think Ingram does kind of make a back end RB2 perhaps.
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not there.
High end RB3.
Maybe. If considering there's a lot of buys next week, maybe. I hate the 3-headed attack in an already struggling offense. We'll see how this kind of develops along the week, but definitely got to consider here on the waiver wire. I'm going to take a look at another guy who, we're not quite sure what situation is going to be in that backfield there, but Craig Reynolds, running back for the Detroit Lions. This is a guy who should be widely available. He's available in 95% of ESPN leagues, and we saw no Jahmyr Gibbs this past couple weeks, and he may not be back in week 7. He hasn't practiced yet. He's still dealing with that hamstring issue. And then David Montgomery, pour one out for the Montgomery fantasy managers here because he left with a rib injury in the second quarter. We're still waiting to find out more information on that. So far, everything has come
out
back
this morning.
negative.
They said he's going to miss some time, though, is what they said this morning.
So there it is. I mean, so you're expecting that he's going to miss at least 1 week, potentially 2. I know checking in with Adam Hutchison, our injury expert here over at Football Guys, he did say that typically with these injuries, a guy like David Montgomery could be missing about 2 weeks here of time. So you might see Jahmyr Gibbs come back and take a larger role. But if Gibbs can't go and Montgomery is out, we're looking at Craig Reynolds being in that backfield and getting the bulk of the carries. And I know he didn't look great this past week because it was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Really, none of the running backs looked great going up against the Buccaneers. But Dave, I will say this. He was crushing it in my points per block league because that block where he came just sprinting in like a WWE
more on that play
tag
than
team.
Amonra did.
Yeah. It was like a WWE tag team where someone just hit him in and he came sprinting down the ramp to get in the ring and boom, he blocked one guy into another defender, took out 2 players for the Amon-Ra St. Brown touchdown. I think that Craig Reynolds, we know he's not the same talent as David Montgomery. He's not the same talent as Jahmyr Gibbs, but in a best case scenario, you're looking at Craig Reynolds getting the bulk of the carries with Devine Ozigbo being the other running back active for the Lions in week 7. Now, what seems a little bit more likely,
out for the season. So there's nowhere else really to go.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could be one of those really sneaky waiver wire ads. I think there's still a likelihood Jahmyr Gibbs does come back, but that Lions bye week is not that far away. So we could see a lot of these starting running backs get some rest here. Dave, why don't you hit us with
before I talk about my player, I want to, because I think we're going to get a lot of questions on Craig Reynolds. He's my number one waiver wire pickup for the week if he's available. Now, let me just throw a question out there. If Jahmyr Gibbs is active in week 7, do you prefer Craig Reynolds over Jahmyr Gibbs? I mean, what we've heard coming out of, Detroit so far is Dan Campbell saying that they really like that guy that could shoulder 20 plus touches, and they really like Jahmyr Gibbs as kind of being the change of pace guy. Is it possible that we're looking at Craig Reynolds potentially as a better start in week 7 than Jahmyr Gibbs, even if they're both active, obviously assuming David Montgomery is out?
I think a lot of that's going to have to also depend on the health too, right? If they say that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be limited because of the hamstring, that sort of changes things. I'd probably have them ranked really closely back to back here. I definitely, we need to dive into it a bit more as the week goes on. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I'm ready to say that I would prefer Craig Reynolds over Jahmyr Gibbs this week. I understand that, Dan Campbell has talked about the volume getting to David Montgomery and that style of running back, but I don't really know that Craig Reynolds is that style of running back either, or if he's that guy that has a talent.
If one of them's going to stumble into the end zone twice, I'd put my money on Craig Reynolds over Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think he makes for a very, very strong spot start next week, even if Jahmyr Gibbs is active. Is what I'm saying is that, like, we've seen this offense easily support 2 running backs. I don't think we're looking at the David Montgomery type ceiling, but I think that we're still looking at a very high ceiling for Craig Reynolds in this offense and behind that offensive line.
I think he can be a decent spot start. Very strong is a little bit of a stretch from my end, but I think he could be a decent spot start. Dave, why don't you finish us off here with the running back position?
Sure, I'm going to give you kind of a twofer here. Jordan Mason available in almost every league out there, 99% of leagues, and then Elijah Mitchell is still available in about 3 and 4 leagues. Now, we have no idea how much time Christian McCaffrey is going to miss, if any. Oblique injury. They said he was questionable to return. He returned, immediately went to the locker room after that, so we're going to have to keep a close eye on how that shakes out throughout the week. Now, this backfield is a tough one to get a read on because in the past, Elijah Mitchell has been the very clear backup, but it was Jordan Mason's job yesterday. Now, perhaps Elijah Mitchell was just limited in his first game back from injury, but we can't ignore what we saw, which was that Jordan Mason saw the work, and Jordan Mason has a pretty big size advantage over Mitchell, and he runs really well in this offense. Mitchell is the smaller and faster guy, and we might still be holding on to some of that rookie magic. We saw Elijah Mitchell really kind of surprise everybody when we thought Trey Sermon was going to be the guy in San Francisco. Elijah Mitchell came out the gate looking hot, but since that kind of 8-week window, his rookie season, we haven't seen too much from Elijah Mitchell since. So I think Elijah Mitchell's role in this offense is more of the change of pace guy. They didn't want to trust him last year, which is why they went out and traded for Christian McCaffrey. I think if we're looking at the guy that's going to lead the backfield in touches in a McCaffrey absence, I think it's probably going to be Jordan Mason right now, and he's available in even more leagues than Elijah Mitchell. Again, this is all kind of speculative. This is a tough backfield to get a read on, and we have seen that this Shanahan scheme can basically prop up any running back for single-week spot starts, whether it's JaMycal Hasty or whoever. It doesn't really matter, but I think if I had to put my chips on one guy this week, Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell, I think it's going to be Jordan Mason.
Yeah, it seems like week 7, we're getting, a couple running backs here that could give us value for 1 week, a really quick rental. And I think that's kind of the tough thing here, Dave. So rather than going like, who's the priority here, right? We already talked about Craig Reynolds would be the guy that you'd be targeting out of this, and probably Jordan Mason as well. If we find out that Christian McCaffrey can't play, I think the
Especially
bigger
against the
question here.
Vikings. That's a really nice matchup
Yeah.
next week. That's a really nice matchup.
Yeah, I would say this, instead of trying to prioritize them of who we would take over the other, how about this? What percentage of waiver wire fab would you be looking to spend on these guys if you absolutely need that win here in week 7?
So I think Tyjae Spears is the guy that is the priority. And obviously he's not available in quite as many leagues, but the standalone
Right.
value he has is pretty nice, especially in PPR leagues, contingent upside if Derrick Henry were to fall off. So I think Tyjae Spears is the guy that if he's still available, I'm dropping 20 to 30% of my fab on. But Craig Reynolds and Jordan Mason are guys that I'm okay dropping 15 to 20% on. And if you really need a spot start, if you've got Christian McCaffrey, if you've got David Montgomery, and you really need somebody this week, I might even go as high as 25 or 30% for either of these guys. But it's tough too because we don't know if McCaffrey's going to miss any time. And you could splash some money on Jordan Mason and then they can come out Wednesday and say, oh, just kidding, McCaffrey's fine and he's playing this week. So that's kind of the risk with these early week waivers, but that's what I'm looking at with these two guys. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, it sounds about right. I think it's just, you kind of have to ask yourself, how much does a win matter to you? And I think that
Right.
those wins should be valued differently, right? If you're a team that's, finished up, you're 5-1 right now, maybe you're saying, I'll hold on to my fab
Right.
as we get closer to the playoffs and I can stash one of those guys as we get later on in the weeks. Whereas, right now, it's going to be those teams that are desperate, saying I'm 1-4 right now, or 1-5, excuse me. I really need a win. It's all in. Push the chips in. All right, Dave, let's move on to our wide receivers that we're looking at here. And first guy I'm going to talk about is Jameson Williams, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, Dave. I don't know about all that. I don't want to get too excited here, but he did have a really impressive 45-yard touchdown catch that he adjusted on a ball that felt like it just hung in the air for approximately 45 seconds from Jared Goff. It was just up there forever. And I'm going to do like the scouting thing here for a moment. Still not the best catch attempt from Jameson Williams. Go up and go get that ball. Don't let it kind of almost seemed like it fell into the chest there, but let's not take away a brilliant play here. Okay. Good touchdown for Jameson Williams. The problem here is he's still 5th in routes run amongst the wide receivers. The concern is he's just not playing enough snaps. And you're hoping that gets better, right? Like, we didn't think he was just going to jump in and take the majority of the snaps and get the majority of the targets. But the hope is that with this play, Jared Goff has a bit more trust in him. The coaching staff has a bit more trust in him. I think that the highlights are fun for us, on the fantasy side of it, and for the fans and the people that are rooting for Jameson Williams, which, by the way, it just seems like everybody on Twitter is rooting so hard for Jameson Williams. But we really need to see more work from him, more snaps for him. I'm hoping this can pave the way for him going forward. Dave, why
Yeah,
don't you take
I
us
mean,
to our...
it
Yeah.
was fun to see. It seems like every other touch that he gets, it's either a drop or something, but then every other touch, it seems like 50% of the time when he gets the ball in his hands, it goes for a huge touchdown. So glad to see him kind of falling right back in line doing that again this week. But I'll talk about Zay Jones here, and it seems like Trevor Lawrence is finally starting to look a little bit better. We saw it on Sunday, of course. Now there's the injury concern and the MRIs, and we don't know if it's a knee or an ankle or what's going on here, but this offense is only going to get better once Zay Jones comes back in the offense. And in the one game we saw Zay Jones at full health, he had 7 targets. I think, much like I've talked about a lot of players, at this point in the season, we need to kind of realign what our expectations are for different players. And I think we need to maybe understand that Calvin Ridley isn't going to be that alpha wide receiver one, commanding 160 plus targets and giving us top 10 production every single week. I think he is more of, kind of a wide receiver too, which isn't to say anything bad about Calvin Ridley. He's a very good football player, but I think what that means is that there's going to be more opportunities here and more targets to go around. And especially next week, if Zay Jones can return, Calvin Ridley is going to get that Marshawn Lattimore treatment, which we have seen him get shut down by premier corners so far, meaning Zay Jones could be set up for a big week as early as next week against the Saints. So still available in almost 70% of leagues. If you need some wide receiver help, Zay Jones kind of feels like a plug-and-play wide receiver 3 when he's healthy.
And we've talked about this, that the Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense is just better when Zay Jones is there. It opens up the field a lot more for all of these guys. So it's not really a negative for the guys like Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. Granted, there's only one football to go around, but the offense gets better. I'd say the big thing to pay attention to this week as well is going to be the injury status of Trevor Lawrence and that knee going forward. They're still running some tests and figuring things out there. So if he's healthy and ready to go, like you said, Dave, Zay Jones is a guy that should be rostered everywhere. I'm going to bring up a guy that we talked about last week, and we're just going to keep talking about him until he's rostered everywhere. And it's Josh Downs, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, who's available in 68% of leagues. And this was, I still go back to it. And sometimes I might hold on to these rookies that I love a bit too much, those rookie crushes. And Josh Downs is one of my rookie crushes, just a phenomenal route runner, a little guy that plays so much bigger than he is. And right now he's been producing for the Indianapolis Colts, second in snaps, second in routes run, second in targets, second in receptions. He is the unequivocal wide receiver 2 for this Indianapolis Colts team. And this past week, he finished with 5 receptions and he finally got his first touchdown. So we're going to see a little bit of a different Colts offense with Gardner Minshew under center. We started to see they're working in Jonathan Taylor a bit back more, but the wide receiver picture now has gotten a little bit clearer. Josh Downs, clearly the wide receiver 2 there. And now Alec Pierce left this last game with a shoulder injury in the fourth quarter. So you could see it, not that he was taking up a whole lot of targets, but you could see even more targets going towards Josh Downs. And since week 3, Downs has been the wide receiver 24 in PPR scoring. He's had 3 games with at least 13 PPR points. And I'm not saying that he's going to be a locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver every week, but this is a guy that in 3 wide receiver leagues or, multiple leagues where you need to put multiple flexes, in a PPR format, Josh Downs is a guy that I'm comfortable plugging in every week. Dave, take us to our next wide receiver here.
So I think this guy that I want to talk about next is my major priority for this week, especially if you need somebody who can be kind of a game changer. We haven't seen it so far from Rashee Rice, very limited in the opportunities that he has seen, but he pulled 4 targets despite playing less than half of the snaps. Now, this is kind of tricky. It feels like when we were talking about Kadarius Toney years ago, and even Kadarius Toney earlier this season, when he's on the field and when he's getting snaps, he is getting the ball, he just isn't getting the snaps. So you're kind of betting on seeing that workload grow a little bit, but looks like he could be the wide receiver 1. I mean, there's very, very little target competition right now in this wide receiver room. It is Travis Kelce and then everybody else. And for the second straight week, Rashee Rice was second in targets behind Travis Kelce. Now, again, we're hoping we could see this role grow, but he just pops off the screen. I mean, I'm sure you saw that one screenplay that he had, Alfredo, where he looked like he was shot out of a cannon. Like the way he was running with the ball after the catch, I thought it was in Isaiah Pacheco's hands for a minute, and then I realized that it was Rashee Rice after he went down. Great athlete, second-round pick, starting to see his role grow a little bit. So not a guy that you can really plug into your lineup right now, but I think he's worth a pickup and a stash because he could have that game-changing upside as the season progresses.
Well, and he's a guy coming out of SMU that we all expected him. It's going to take some time for him to get up to speed for the NFL game. Sure, it's not my favorite term to use for these,
but a lot of people threw it around. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that was the terminology that was used there. And
good athlete, explosive. All those buzzwords.
But so that's typically what you hear about these guys that come from, let's just call them smaller programs that don't have to run a whole lot of pro concepts. And you go into that Kansas City offense where we saw last year, Sky Moore took him quite a bit of time and seems like it's still taking him quite a bit of time. But that's what Andy Reid's offense is known for. So if Rashee Rice continues to see his role expand and continues to get targeted at the rate that he's getting targeted at with that offense, he could be really valuable. So I get that there with you calling him your top wide receiver priority ad for the week. I'm going to talk about another guy who's been productive over the past few weeks. It's Curtis Samuel, wide receiver for the Washington Commanders. He's available in 72% of leagues. And, when I first saw this name, I started to tell myself, I don't want to step on the rake again. I don't want to fall for it again.
You can't keep getting away with it.
You can't keep getting away with this, man. Like this, it was the same thing last year where it's okay, Curtis Samuel, here it is. And there's certain guys that it's just fun to root for. You just want to see them play well. They're good players that you just want to see them get the opportunity. Curtis Samuel now had his 3rd straight game with a touchdown on the season, 17 receptions on 19 targets. over the last 3 games, not on the season. He's been hyper efficient over these last 3 games, and he's become very similar to Josh Downs. He's become the wide receiver 2 on this Washington Commanders team. Now, my concern is, what does that mean, being the wide receiver 2 on this Sam Howell-led offense, on an offense that is being spread so thin in terms of target share? You've got Logan Thomas, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin. Even with Terry McLaurin being that primary receiver, he hasn't really broken away from the pack. And I do get worried about players like this where so much of their success stems from touchdowns. I'm not saying Curtis Samuel is not a good waiver wire ad, nor am I saying that he's not a guy that you should maybe start in good matchups, because he's been producing. But I think it's something to consider here that so much of the production is coming from the touchdowns. And we've seen it before with Samuel, where he'll have a few of these spike weeks because of the touchdowns, and he's going to get hyper targeted for a little bit, and then it starts to go away. So this is not an indictment on Curtis Samuel. It's more so an indictment on this Washington Commanders offense. I don't think that he's a bad player, and I think that he should be added, but I don't know that I would necessarily make him a priority add this week.
Yeah, I faded him in my rankings a little bit this week, and when I saw him go in for, like you said, a touchdown for the 3rd straight week, I just like, come on, like like I said, he can't keep getting away with this, and he does 3 times in a row. So hey, maybe he'll do it again this week.
But by the way, just really quick, that Commanders Brian Robinson. Did you see that touchdown? Brian Robinson taking his screen and then just absolutely obliterating the defenders in his way.
Yeah. You hear like the term bowling ball a lot, but like he literally hit 3 defenders at once and they flew through the air like
he hit one of his own guys. He hit one of his own guys that was trying to block for him. And instead of trying to go around that block, he went out of his way to make sure, I'm going to hit everyone. I'm going to hit every single person and just launch them into the end zone.
And just going off on a quick tangent here, I wrote about Brian Robinson last week in my trending down section, and I said, even though he's trending down, this is a good matchup for him. He's proven to be pretty game script dependent, but it's also really easy to find out the game scripts that he is going to do well in. Literally, all you got to do, look at the Vegas spread. If it is less than 5 points, it's going to be a close game, and he is going to get the touches. So, yeah, Brian Robinson, probably not the plug-and-play RB1 we had hoped for after the first couple of weeks of the season, but he's going to have these big weeks, and he is a fun player to watch. But I'll wrap it up here, talking about Rashid Shaheed, and we're talking about a guy that's available in almost 90% of leagues here. So, deep leagues that we're talking about. I got to be honest, man. I'm not too crazy about the wide receiver 3 on a Derek Carr-led Saints team, but Carr seems to really like him. He's had 6+ targets in 3 of 7 games this year, and almost every target he receives is a very high-value target. He pulls his targets deep downfield. It's going to be pretty tough to predict when the spike weeks come, because he has that very volatile skill set where you're kind of hoping that he can catch a big play, and if he doesn't, he's kind of burning you in the lineup. But I think he's worth a speculative pickup and a stash for now. Maybe if you're in a super deep league, like you said, multiple flex, 3 wide receivers, something like that, you can stream him through bye weeks. But I think with Rashid Shaheed, he's shown that he's more than just a speedster. He's kind of a polished route runner. So if something were to happen to Mike Thomas or Chris Olave, God forbid, then we're looking at him as the wide receiver 2 in this offense, where he could be pretty valuable. I just want to say, I was digging into Rashid Shaheed. He wasn't a guy that I really looked into too much coming into the league. He's clearly a speedster, but he clocked like a 4.53 40-yard dash. So I don't know what happened. Maybe he had like McDonald's for breakfast. Something was slowing him down.
Game speed is different than the track speed, you know?
I just got to say, I was kind of surprised to see how poor his measurables were at the combine when you watch him in a game and he consistently looks like the fastest player on the field. So this is just my reminder not to read too much into combine and pro day measurements, because like you said, game speed is very different, and Rashid Shaheed is very fast.
Yeah, I would definitely say he's one of those deeper league ads. If you're starting multiple receivers, you're looking at a 12 or 14 team league and he's still available out there. Yeah, that's a guy that I'd be looking at. And then last guy here, another very deep league ad, but this one's a bit narrative-y, Dave, and maybe you can follow me on this one. Marvin Mims, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos. And I know this could just be me still stepping on the rake and kind of holding on to a draft crush, but we've seen that Marvin Mims, I don't think I'm being that crazy here when I say he's probably been the best wide receiver on this team, or at least second best wide receiver on this Denver Broncos team, and just not getting work. And we saw in the Thursday night football game, the Broncos offense just looks bad. Jerry Jeudy had that, just go Google Jerry Jeudy from Thursday night football. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. There was a lot that happened that night. There's rumors of him being traded. There's little Jordan Humphrey, who outsnapped Marvin Mims for the Denver Broncos, was then cut a day later, 2 days later, whatever it is.
I made that joke. Do you remember that? I said that on, like, I was just like Sean Payton bringing in all of his guys, his old friends. I was like, we're going to see little Jordan Humphrey and Traquan Smith outsnap Marvin Mims. I said that completely tongue in cheek, and
yes.
then it happened.
I don't quite know what the Denver Broncos are doing right now or what that offense is doing, but I do know this: at some point, Sean Payton is going to be really fed up with everything. And we could see a guy like Marvin Mims in an offense that's going to have to throw the ball a lot with a defense that's not very good. And Marvin Mims could be getting a ton of snaps, a ton of targets, and he is an explosive playmaker. I think that we're looking at a team that might be in for a blow up at some point and trade away some of these bigger name players. And you could see guys like Marvin Mims and Jaleel McLaughlin being the guys to take on major roles in this offense. So, Dave, I just want to confirm your top waiver wire ad from the wide receivers would be Rashee Rice this week, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go with Josh Downs as my top guy, just because I see the early value here with Gardner Minshew and then the season long value as well. Let's wrap this up. We're going to go to our tight ends and quarterbacks. Dave, why don't you start us off with the first tight end?
Jonnu Smith, talking about him for the second straight week. Can't believe I'm saying it, but Jonnu Smith just kind of keeps producing here. He's had 5+ targets in every single game so far this year. Scored his first touchdown of the season on Sunday, which was great to see. I don't know what else to say.
Kyle Pitts got a touchdown.
Kyle Pitts got a touchdown too.
Kyle Pitts.
Jonnu Smith is the tight end 13 in scoring. He's not going to go away. I mean, we've seen back-to-back weeks now where this Atlanta Falcons team has aired it out quite a bit. Desmond Ridder hasn't looked great, but he has at least gotten the ball to his playmakers. And, we talk so much about the playmakers being Drake London and Kyle Pitts, but Jonnu Smith, I mean, I got to say, I'm happy to see it. Like Jonnu Smith, when he was in Tennessee, banging the drum for him, waiting for it to happen. When he signed that huge contract with New England, I thought that he was going to be, Rob Gronkowski 2.0. Belichick was singing his praises. Didn't really happen there. And now, on his third team in as many years, I'd kind of written off and forgotten about Jonnu Smith, but great to see that it is finally kind of coming to fruition here, and he is being a pass-catching weapon. So, yeah, I mean, Jonnu Smith he's in that back end tight end 1, high end tight end 2, whatever you want to call it, that streaming discussion every single week.
Yeah, he's in the back end tight end 1, high end tight end 2 discussion for his own team as well. It's just it's crazy how the Falcons offense is running. I don't get it, but fantasy football. That's how this is happening. The tight end landscape is just so bad. And it's so bad that I'm going to take a look at a rookie who finally had a good game. And it's Michael Mayer, tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's available in 99% of leagues. And this really came out of nowhere. Dave, as it stands right now before Monday Night Football, he's the tight end 5 on the week. He was third on the team in routes run, led the team in receiving yards. He played the most snaps of his career. This was by all means a breakout game for him. He was heavily targeted by Jimmy Garoppolo early. 4 of his 5 receptions in the game came in the first half with Jimmy G. So we have to watch what happens with the health of Jimmy Garoppolo. I know he left the game with a back injury. This may be something where we may not see him for a couple of weeks, but Michael Mayer, the snap share is going up. The participation in routes has gone way up. He appears to finally be the starting tight end for this team, and it's not as much of a split as it used to be with Austin Hooper. He could be a top 3 receiving option on this team. And it's not a stretch to say that he could be a top 12 or 15 tight end the rest of the season because of just because of how bad the tight end position is. We've gotten to the point, Dave, where it's like anyone who goes out there and catches 5 passes and a touchdown, you're like, it's probably a top 10 tight end. Who knows? We're at a very weird stage here. Why don't you finish us off with the final player? This is going to be our quarterback.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Sam Howell here. Still available in 83% of leagues. We talked about him last week as well. I mean, he is Blake Bortles 2.0, which we kind of joked about last week. He is a garbage time machine. But, man, 20-plus fantasy points in 3 straight games in 4 of his last 5. Right now, as it stands, he is the QB4 from Week 6. Gets the Giants next week, which haven't been a great defense, but, I think a little bit better than some people expected. And
then they made Eagles. Josh Allen struggle.
Josh Allen just plays down to his competition. I love him so much, man. He is great, but If he's playing against Mahomes, he looks like Mahomes. And when he's playing against Tyrod Taylor, he looks like Tyrod Taylor. I can't really understand it. Like, he just mirrors the competition every single week, but, still got it done. But, Sam Howell, if you look 2 weeks ahead, he's playing the Eagles, which probably looks scary, but Sam Howell played pretty formidably against the Eagles a few weeks ago and gets them again here. So Sam Howell, crazy to say, but I think he belongs in that top 10 discussion every single week as a QB1. I don't know if you can say that he's like a set it and forget it guy yet, but when you've scored 20 plus in 4 of your last 5 games, got to ride the hot hand here. I mean, he's got some good weapons around him, and he is looking good in this role.
Yeah, he's one of those guys, a fringe QB1, and he's almost like a streamer every single week because of that garbage time production. But hey, garbage time points still count, kids. That's how fantasy football works. Now, we went through all of our ads here that you can get off the waiver wire for running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. But the bigger question is, who are you going to drop to get these guys, okay? And that's the thing. You get that FOMO, that fear of missing out. You don't want to drop a guy and then all of a sudden he pops off weeks later. So we're going to continue that conversation and tell you which players to be dropping this week. We're going to do that over on the audio side of this podcast. So all you have to do is click the link down in the description down below. You can check us out over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, any major podcast platform. And we're going to keep this conversation going. So thank you so much for joining us here for the video. Go and follow us over to the audio side of this, and we'll see you next time. Adios.